Hello, I am Lee Watts. Thank you for joining Alterity ADR's webinar today. We are so excited to have you, and I just want to share a little bit about Alterity just for a couple of minutes, just to make sure that you understand who we are and how we can definitely serve you in the future. So Alterity ADR is a cutting edge national mediation, arbitration, and dispute management firm that offers comprehensive services and high quality dispute resolution experts. The firm is one of the fastest growing ADR providers in the country and stands out by offering services that reflect Alterity's values of professionalism, expertise, and diversity. So once again, we're so excited for this panel of experts today that are going to share some really practical and informative insights and wisdom and tips for you all. And we're so happy to have Deborah Hilton with us today, who is going to moderate this panel. Each of them will share a little about themselves, and we're going to go ahead and get started with Deborah, who is also one of the mediators for Alterity ADR. So Deborah, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you to all of you out there in virtual land who have chosen to spend some time with us, whether it's today, live, or in a later recording. Thank you, Victoria, Brad, and Zabi for joining me. I'll ask you in just a minute to introduce yourselves. I am thrilled to be moderating this panel today and to be a member of the Alterity panel. I have an independent dispute resolution practice. I'm based out of Durham, North Carolina, but work nationally and when opportunity arises globally. I do mediation, arbitration, and I'm fascinated in increasing work in conflict resolution or engagement for prevention of expanded disputes. In my role in ADR, I'm active in working towards diversity in ADR. I co-chair the ABA's Women in Dispute Resolution, and I am a member of the North Carolina Bar Association's Women in the Profession Committee. I also am a member of the Campaign for Greener Arbitration's North American Committee, looking to factors of how we can help prevent climate change. I have my other foot firmly planted in the business world. I serve on 3 corporate boards, 1 large family for-profit, 2 other nonprofits, all in the healthcare space. So the issues of ESG are very relevant to me in both of my chosen professions. Let me ask first to welcome Victoria Sahani and ask her to give us a bit of an introduction of her background.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thanks to Alterity ADR for inviting me to participate in this wonderful event. My name is Victoria Sahani. I am the Associate Dean of Special Projects and a Professor of Law at Arizona State University's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law in Phoenix. I also serve as director of ASU's university-wide Faculty Inclusion Research for System Transformation Initiative, which is a diversity initiative for faculty at ASU. I've had the pleasure of serving with Deborah on the North American subcommittee of the Campaign for Greener Arbitration, which I will talk about a little bit later in my remarks. And I greatly appreciate, Deborah, your kind invitation to be part of this crucially important ESG-focused event. I also serve on several diversity-focused initiatives, such as the U.S. Subcommittee of the Equal Representation in Arbitration Pledge, REAL, which is an acronym, Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers, Blacks of the American Society of International Law, Arbitral Women, and the Task Force on Diversity of the Arbitration Committee of the United States Council for International Business, among others. I believe that diversity is fundamental to realizing our shared goals in ESG in all 3 categories: environmental, social, and governance, And I look forward to discussing these themes further during this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I first met Brad, who works apparently down the street from me, when he made a presentation to a corporate directors group here locally in North Carolina. Brad, tell us more about your experience.
Oh, thank you very much, Deborah, and my thanks to Alterity for including me in the panel today. So my name is Brad Ives. I'm the CEO of Credo ESG Solutions, which is a firm based here in Durham, North Carolina, and in Austin, Texas, that provides broad-based advice to companies and investment funds in the ESG space. I started my career as a lawyer, worked in finance in New York and Charlotte for the first third of my career before working in institutional money management in Charlotte and in London, and then later led two clean tech companies that were startups before settling into government, and finally being the chief sustainability officer at the University of North Carolina. So I come at ESG as an experienced manager, but also as a lawyer. And what we do in the space is to try and avoid conflicts. We're looking to help companies avoid making governance and social HR type mistakes or and causing environmental problems that could lead to disputes and lawsuits. We also try and help companies basically build better companies. We see ESG as being the key to moving away from simple short-term profit metrics as a measure of success by a company and looking to build long-term value by doing the right thing, whether that's by the environment, by their employees of the communities where they operate, or behaving ethically. So I look forward to the panel today, and we'll welcome questions when we have time for those. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And last, and certainly not at all least, we welcome Zabi. Would you please give us your background from movement? And he seems to have disappeared from my screen. So we'll hope that he's not suffered a loss of power. I was actually in a presentation one time when the power went off in my building. I was working from a desktop and did not have a backup attached to my computer. That was the last time that situation existed. Zabi, please.
I'm back. I'm not sure what happened there, but thank you, Deborah. And it's nice to be here, part of this panel. My name is Zabi Yakin. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. My background is as a litigation lawyer and entertainment lawyer in Toronto. I did that for about 9 years until 2013-14, when I joined a friend of mine to make social impact films. So we made one film on conflict minerals in the Congo, and what we realized with that making that film was that there were a lot of audience members who were very inspired and wanted to do something about the issue of supply chains, and for the most part, there wasn't much that they could do. So when we worked on our next film about modern slavery in the supply chain of the fashion industry, we created various campaigns to go along with the film, so that audiences who saw the film were empowered to do something about that issue. And a couple of years later, that translated into a platform we built called Movement, whose intention was to bring together all of these various stakeholders. So bring together companies, NGOs, individuals who wanted to be active on environmental, social issues, and provide us a software solution around that, so that the impact could be tracked, measured, and that we could take advantage of the power of software to better engage users.
Thank you so much, Zabi. And I apologize for occasionally, perhaps often, mispronouncing your name. It's a failing of sort of seeing things in print more than hearing them. I love the way that this panel itself, as well as our backgrounds and locations, reflects the very diversity that Alterity has been founded to present to the dispute resolution community. I always think it's helpful to understand how we got to this moment in time. You can't open one's email hardly without, or a social stream without seeing some reference to an ESG opportunity. So let's look at how we came to this point in time. In 2005, the International Finance Corporation, a part of the World Bank Group, and the UN Global Conflict convened a landmark conference in the investment community and those who regulate them. And that conference was aptly titled, "Who Cares Wins." And that conference report marked the first use of the phrase ESG. In 2020, the International Business Council, the World Economic Forum, in collaboration with all 4 major accounting firms, released a report and a new initiative in which those renowned players in the business community staked out their belief that the interrelationship of economic, environmental, and social factors is increasingly material to long-term value creation, the theme that Brad introduced and that you'll hear throughout our conversation today. That report adopted a framework of 4 pillars: governance, planet, people, prosperity, and was characterized as designing to take the focus to inclusive shared wealth beyond just ESG. Now, strictly speaking, we all know that ESG is environmental, social, and governance. And often these factors can get identified as ends in themselves, which are, of course, worthy, laudable, and I would suggest desirable ends to achieve. But I think these factors are best viewed in the context of driving value within an organization. And I'll make the observation that even in nonprofit organizations, where the organization isn't seeking to make a profit, it's still seeking to be solvent, seeking to be financially sustainable. So I think these factors are relevant in every organization, regardless of the profit motive or not. So let's look at how we got here. It was only in the 1950s in the US that the Supreme Court issued its landmark opinion in Brown versus Board of Education, one of the earliest cases requiring equality in this context in public schools. Unfortunately, those of us here in the South know all too well that the words of the Supreme Court were not, in fact, the lived law of the land for many years. It took the civil rights movement of the 1960s to begin implementing Brown, and also to drive hallmark legislation, of course, that extended equal opportunity beyond the classroom. It was also during this decade of major social change that women's liberation began to take women out of traditional roles and into more decision-making and business roles on a broader basis. It also led to an increased awareness and movement in environmentalism, such that the first Earth Day was born just a few months after the end of the 1960s in April of 1970. The 1970s brought that historic environmental legislation here in the US, the global oil crisis, which created interest in energy efficiency and alternatives, and of course, the Vietnam protest fueled social change in many areas beyond what we can talk about today. The 1980s are often shown as the birth of sort of conscious investment, with the divestment movement to leave South Africa. And major investors began to focus on reasons or aspects, drivers beyond profits as they built their portfolios. In the 1990s, socially responsible investment began to expand to screen out other harmful companies. The merchants of death, or the sin companies of tobacco, alcohol, and guns were some of the early targets. 2005, as I referenced earlier, brought us the reference to ESG. And in 2008, Larry Fink, the well-known chair of BlackRock, one of the major investment managers, characterized a demand from society that companies show a social purpose, a positive contribution to society. And it's really these factors that bring ESG to the forefront that it has today in our corporate lives. So why is an ADR provider talking about ESG? How does that impact ADR and alternative dispute resolution? Victoria, bring us up to speed and link these two themes together for us, if you would.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate your introduction. It's a great segue. We have certainly moved forward part of the way since 2018. If you guys remember, in 2018, there were articles about Jay-Z, the rapper, lamenting the lack of Black arbitrators, and particularly in diverse arbitrators in general. But we still have a long way to go. And I think that now the case for change hinges on the fact, not just that diversity is a good thing in and of itself, but that there are better outcomes in dispute resolution and better outcomes in business that arise from diverse stakeholders in the room and diverse decision-making. So I just want to quickly cite two research studies. One research study was published in Forbes magazine or Forbes Online, and they found that diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time, which was a study of 200 different business teams. And they make those decisions twice as fast as teams that are not diverse. And this is something we can all be excited about, diverse teams require half the amount of meetings to get to the result. So very exciting, as we all tend to find ourselves in lots and lots of meetings. Gender diverse teams make better decisions 73% of the time as well. And so this is really important. The second study I want to highlight actually talks about another phenomenon, which is not just that socially different group members bring new viewpoints or approaches, but also when you have a more homogeneous group, there actually may be different viewpoints and ideas within that group that aren't brought out until you bring in a new person, a person with a different viewpoint or approach. Catherine Phillips is a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, and she and some co-authors did a study of bringing in a diverse member into a group that's homogeneous. In that study, they used fraternities and sororities as their idea of homogeneity. And they brought someone in who was not part of the fraternity or sorority. And when that person was brought in, there are actually more new ideas generated even among the people who were from the same group. And the reason for this, the argument is that when people are homogeneous, they want to be around others who agree. So they tend to have sort of an echo chamber of agreement amongst themselves because of their shared experiences, and they emphasize similarities. When you add individuals to the mix who have a different view, even the individuals who view themselves as similar or same tend to focus more on how they think differently. And you can get actually more new ideas out of that process as well. So Phillips's study was the first study to look beyond the newcomer's impact on the group and focus instead on how the newcomer shifts the group interaction, making it more lively and more out of the box in terms of the thinking. So lots of reasons I could go on. There are lots and lots of studies at this point about this, on how diversity is really, really key there. Go ahead.
Victoria, if I may just jump in for a second. I think those studies are absolutely fascinating. The anecdotal is also fascinating. Talk about, just briefly, not the setup of the Jay-Z controversy, but let's talk about his concern and the importance of reflective justice and the appearance of reflective justice.
Yeah, absolutely. So his concern was, he had a dispute. He was going into arbitration. He had no problem with arbitration as a means of dispute resolution, by the way. He was just concerned about the fact that there wasn't representation among the pool of arbitrators from which he could select. And he also felt that the justice that he would receive out of the arbitration process would not be as complete, because these other perspectives are not represented among the decision makers. And I think that's important too, because this is a party in a dispute, not just a provider or an institution, but a party saying, I will get better justice. I will get a better outcome. Even if I lose, I will get a better outcome if there are diverse individuals among the decision makers. And it's part of my right as a party to have diverse decision makers from which to choose. And so I think that was important too. So I hope that helps.
It absolutely does. And I think it's pretty evident when we take 2 minutes to think about why diversity is important, but how is ADR in sync with the issues of environmental concerns?
Yes, absolutely. So diversity and inclusivity, I actually think may help our global environmental concerns, and I can talk more about that. But if we want to focus just on arbitration for a moment, and I'll talk about mediation in a minute as well. But arbitration is the ADR process. It's most similar to litigation. We have hearings, we have large volumes of documents, we've got witnesses, we have multi-member tribunals. If you add to this a global dimension of international arbitration, you have the travel element. And you also have technological clashes, which are basically, there are individuals in the world who are in modern societies that have a lot of technological access. There are other parts of the world that don't have as much technological access. And so all of this leads to inequities. So the problem is that the environmental impacts of arbitration, mediation as well, include a variety of different ways in which carbon is emitted by those who participate. So big one is paper. That's one of the biggest ones. The amount of paper generated in the average dispute is massive, as we all know. Litigation, absolutely huge. Arbitration, not much smaller than litigation. You may have a little bit less discovery or evidence, but it still can be quite voluminous. Mediation can have a lot of paper too. And there's also a lot of signatures. So that's one issue. So, does the signature have to physically be in ink on paper in triplicate? Like, can we move past that to digital signatures? This is also, it's also affected by laws, because in certain nations, you have to have stamps and seals and ink and all this, and that's an obstacle actually. So, these are two of the big issues. And I would say also the third issue is travel. I mean, that's a big one. Whether it's going to the seat of arbitration, whether it's collecting, if there's multiple arbitrators or multiple mediators coming from multiple nations all in one place, then you've got the parties, the legal counsel, the witnesses, everybody's got to converge upon a spot. And that uses a lot of carbon, a lot of time that is sort of dead time, which is the travel time, as opposed to being used productively. So if you take all those together, one of the advantages in a weird way of having had a pandemic is that we've had to find ways to reduce paper, because we weren't mailing things around, and we weren't traveling as much, and we weren't, so digital signatures and digital documents and virtual hearings have become the norm. And now the question is, can we maintain those things into the future, even though there may be situations in which in person or even on paper may be appropriate. And then when we have to use something that involves carbon, offset it. And so we can talk about carbon offsets and how to do that.
Great. To your point about the impact of arbitration, I read that the impact of one international arbitration hearing versus a remote hearing was the equivalent of the environmental or carbon impact of 15 people in a year in the EU. So by the time you add all that travel, the delivery, the shipping multiple binders, 15 people's 1 year carbon footprint is a difference, right? So thank you, Victoria.
Thanks.
Brad, there's a lot of talk, and I met you as I said earlier, in a presentation on some of the drivers of organizational change. Why are boards and companies focused on ESG today?
That's a great question, Deborah. And I think the answer is it's actually a continuum. Some of it starts with the company itself, and we're seeing this with privately held companies, some public companies just realize the importance of doing better by their communities, by their employees, wanting to ensure they have ethical behavior and wanting to minimize their environmental footprint. So you've got what I would call the do-gooder companies, and it's been derisively referred to as woke capitalism as a potential driver. But in reality, it's a recognition that these are material items that are important to companies. If a company wants to recruit and attract talent, it needs to look at diverse talent. It needs to look at kids coming out of school these days who care more for their fellow human being and want to see women, they want to see people of color, they want to see LGBTQ members recognized and appreciated in the companies where they work. But this is also being demanded oftentimes by the owners. If it's a multi-generational family that owns a company, it might be some of the younger members or some of the more left-leaning members of that family. As we progress to private ownership through private equity funds or backing from venture capital funds, those groups are realizing, as Victoria very adeptly noted, that diverse teams make better decisions, that you want to have an ethical company. Ethical companies end up in less disputes. They get sued less. They have less problems with their regulators. It also likely generates a better product or service for that the company is selling to make money. But increasingly, we're seeing the regulators play a role as well. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has recognized that climate change is material to companies. And the SEC's job is to make sure that investors have material information that they need to make decisions on whether to purchase or sell a security. So they're starting to pay close attention to this. Some of you may have seen that they've just started a probe into a mutual fund run by Goldman Sachs that was purporting to invest in ESG-focused categories. And they're investigating the fact that it appears that Goldman may not have lived up to what they put into the offering documents for that fund. So they did not stick to the criteria. They were seeking to gather funds by appearing to invest in ESG, which is popular now, especially with younger investors, but didn't live up to that. The same thing has happened in Europe. BaFin, the German regulator, conducted a raid of the offices of DWS, which is Deutsche Bank's asset management division, over their claims that they were investing half of their assets in green-linked assets. This led to a resignation of the CEO of that subsidiary during the week afterwards. So we're also seeing the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. It's got a proposed rule. I believe they're taking comments up through the end of this week on it for companies to have climate disclosure. So Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which are the emissions from activities that a company controls. So burning fossil fuels, emissions, those are Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions coming from mainly from the use of electricity, where the power companies are burning fossil fuels to create that electricity. The SEC wants these, is entertaining, requiring that these emissions be disclosed along with the life cycle product emissions called Scope 3 emissions. But then realizing that climate exposure is going to be important to companies as well. So going from everything from the owners of private companies to the regulators of public companies, and then finally the users of products are very concerned about what companies are doing, and companies are responding to that. So we've got a number of interesting drivers that are really raising the importance of E, S, and G for companies all across the world.
Thank you, Brad. Those first two examples you gave it's interesting to think about the SEC mandated disclosure. Those first examples really, I think, are great, not great, but unfortunate examples, we'll say, of the term greenwashing, where organizations are trying to present themselves as perhaps greener than they really are. Is there some expectation that SEC regulated disclosures will have some deterrence to greenwashing and put a little heft behind it?
Oh, absolutely. I think especially going after Goldman Sachs as kind of a showcase target initially, the SEC is looking to send a signal. They're not going after some small group of mutual funds that's not a household word. They're going after one of the biggest players in the market and holding them accountable. On one level, the SEC is just doing what it's always done, which is to ensure that disclosure is accurate and complete. But in another case, it is recognizing that the finance right now is using environmental concerns and ESG concerns more largely as a way of raising capital. And it's sending the signal that if you're going to be doing this and claiming to do the right thing, then you better be doing the right thing, because that's a material issue and it's one that's going to be subject of litigation going forward.
And that's really where one of the many points at which it impacts corporate boards and officers, right, in terms of that risk management. And I think it's true certainly in the C-suite, but as well in the boardroom. Can you speak to that risk management aspect?
Oh, absolutely. When you think of, like I said in my introductory remarks, that a lot of ESG is just about proper management of companies, and proper management of companies entails a great deal of identifying risk and then attempting to mitigate those risks so those do not become the subject of lawsuits or the need for arbitration or mediation. So board members in particular need to make sure that the C-suite at the company understands what their obligations are, that they've got to identify potential material risk. The laundry list of E, S, and G that you can find from a number of different sources gives you a good kind of shopping list of things that directors should make sure that corporate leadership is looking at. And then understanding one of the first steps in an ESG analysis is something called a materiality assessment. So trying to figure out, what is material for a company. And this is something that in-house lawyers, the HR professionals, the ethics and compliance teams in-house need to work with management and then need to report back out to the board on to say, these are the things, we are a company that produces a product that causes an environmental impact. This is a company that's got facilities that are located in areas that may be subject to risk from climate change. So these are companies that employ low-wage people, and have facilities that are in communities where they're potentially making a negative impact there, and have the opportunity to make a positive impact instead. So it really is a case of issue spotting, sizing the potential exposure, and then developing a strategy so that you don't have a problem that's going to cost the company money.
Thank you, Brad. Very helpful perspectives. Zabi, you're at the front lines with your company of helping drive impactful change, but also managing the risk of how that's positioned. Talk to us about some of the factors that are at play there.
So we've spoken with hundreds of companies about their ESG and CSR strategies. And there are a lot of companies right now that are feeling the pressure from multiple stakeholders about needing to do something about this issue. Often they don't know where to get started, and companies like Brad's help them build that strategy in terms of what they stand for. Sometimes it's that is going to be driven by regulatory needs, sometimes by the board or lenders. Where we try to help them is in connection with pressures that they feel from their customers and their employees. There's a lot of good data that employees and customers are abandoning brands that aren't showing leadership on sustainability, on social issues. And a lot of companies are starting to feel that. For companies who were even active when it came to social impact, those numbers have really dropped during the pandemic. It was harder to get together as a team, to run impact programs. People's priorities shifted dramatically to their health concerns and to their jobs and mental health. And so participation in volunteering activities and donations and so on dropped quite dramatically. And so companies are now trying to scramble to find new ways of addressing this. The larger companies, the sort of large enterprises, tend to have big departments, multiple CSR officers and sustainability officers. They have whole teams that are engaged with their employees and with the public. The smaller, medium-sized companies tend not to have anybody who's actively involved in trying to engage their employees, and that's really the where we come in, and those are the conversations that we have with companies. We're all experiencing anxiety every time we hear about the sort of latest report around the environmental crisis or various social issues and the economic crisis. But for millennials and Gen Z, this is even that anxiety and depression is even at a higher level. And so for them, it's not just a matter of saying, yes, it's nice to care about the environment and social issues. They feel it much more deeply. And that's why some of the trends that we're seeing in data is that millennials and Gen Z care more about the kind of employer they work for than salary. Salary is not necessarily the predictor of talent retention, and companies are realizing that there's hard ROI connected with being strong on social impact. So it's not just having the glossy PDF and policy out there. It's around improved retention, improved talent recruitment, higher engagement levels, higher productivity, more brand loyalty, higher brand value. So there are quite a few elements that suggest that this trend is not going away, and companies that are a bit more progressive don't want to lag behind because they realize that it could be damaging to their productivity, to their team, and to the brand value.
We talked a minute ago about greenwashing in the context of investors. It's a little bit different challenge, I expect, to have an organization's employees measuring the way in which they actually walk the talk instead of just talking the talk. I mean, how do companies culture? Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. So how do you see companies successfully implementing these concepts into their culture in a meaningful way?
Greenwashing is absolutely the biggest risk in this space, and companies who are promoting an initiative and advocating on behalf of it without generating measurable and meaningful impact, I think are setting themselves up to fail. We're in talks, for example, with a bank right now who is the management is feeling a lot of pressure from the board of directors to do something on impact, and likewise from the head of investor relations. But what they're very clear about as well is that the impact has to be meaningful and measurable, because the risk, and Brad mentioned a couple of ESG funds who are getting in trouble for essentially greenwashing and not being able to back up their claims with data. And so what we try to focus on with companies is to make sure that their impact is very focused, that the objectives are clearly defined, and that you can track against those objectives over a period of time. And so impact is one thing, measuring impact is one thing, and then that impact has to be meaningful as well. So as an example, we supported an initiative to help young boys who there were 2 young boys who received prosthetic arms because they had lost their arms in factory accidents in the south of India, in the supply chain of the fashion industry. And so that kind of impact can't be taken away from a company. So if a company supports an initiative like that, they can publish material about it, they can present that to their employees and their clients, and that kind of impact is undeniable. If they support, let's say, a beach cleanup, and over a period of time, their efforts have managed to collect 10,000 pounds of garbage from a beach, again, that kind of impact is measurable.
Fantastic. Before I turn the corner back to ADR, Brad, you work alongside Zabby in a sense in this field. Any thoughts or questions or observations to tie into what he's saying?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Zabby has been saying, because I think that corporate positioning is very important, but it's got to be authentic and accurate. Those are the keys that as you work with your with corporate clients to ensure that they understand that while there may be some PR and marketing benefits, that it needs to be for real activity, and actual things. And going back to the cases that I cited with the German and US regulators, calling companies out on misappropriating ESG as something that's purely for marketing and is not backed up by the substance. And I think this is something that will probably be making its way into dispute resolution, that you're going to see companies making claims and not walking their talk and not actually accomplishing things. So I expect companies to be called out on that, and to need to find ways to resolve issues, especially with investors and investment vehicles, where they're not matching the performance, the investment activity with claims.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Victoria, we know that the audience for most ADR types of presentations are in-house lawyers and the lawyers who serve them and work with them as advocates. We've heard the call for actual productive action from both Brad and Zabby, who advise companies. What should the ADR advocate and the in-house lawyers who are overseeing them, what are the practical solutions they should have in their toolkit for implementing ESG all the way into ADR settings?
Well, thank you for that, Deborah. And I'm so thrilled that Brad and Zabby have outlined sort of the business case for companies and given us some examples of how some companies and their constituents, including their employees, are already demanding, and their shareholders are demanding that these changes be made, and their investors as well. So I think it's important. So how do we do this? So I'll talk a little bit. I'll also just sort of go through a quick bullet pointed list, because I don't want to take too much time about on each of these. There's a lot of initiatives and organizations out there that you can get involved with, or that you can have engage with your company. So you can have them present to you, or there's information on their websites. And I'm sure that there will be some information circulated after the panel so that you can access many of these resources. So first of all, our hosts, Alterity ADR. Alterity is the largest female and minority-owned national dispute resolution firm in the country. And the firm is built on diversity, and its mission is to ensure that all parties in disputes have access to a diverse slate of potential neutrals. So definitely look into Alterity and other diverse providers of arbitration or mediation and other dispute resolution services. You can also include clauses in your contracts that require diverse slates of neutrals for your mediation clause or your arbitration clause or your multi-stage clause. So that's something that you can do as a party in your contracts that your general counsel's office is negotiating. There's another initiative called the Ray Corollary Initiative, and it's named for Charlotte E. Ray, who graduated from Howard University School of Law in 1872 as the first Black woman to be admitted to the bar in the United States. And the Ray Corollary Initiative is a plan of action to increase the number of diverse persons selected as arbitrators and mediators. They use a 30% metric in the final selection process, and they rely on measurable results. And the reason why they use the 30% metric is because the Ray Corollary Initiative sort of relies on the principle that there needs to be a critical mass. So we move past, a sole diverse person, or the old idea of tokenism or quota systems in that sense. And instead we say, if we have a critical mass of diverse individuals that are meaningfully part of the pool of potential neutrals, that makes their participation in the dispute resolution process as part of the norm, as opposed to a one-off, hey, we need to do something for diversity, so let's pick a diverse person, which can also diminish that person in terms of their reputation and how they're viewed. So it's better if you have, 30% or even more diverse individuals as part of your slate, as part of whom you're considering, and that way it's no longer considered unusual.
I have to just break in for a second for a comment.
Please.
So the statistics in this are breathtaking. That if the pool of candidates is 20%, the chances of selecting a diverse candidate are very low. If the pool is 30%, the statistical likelihood of selecting a diverse candidate goes up geometrically. It's not proportionate to that 10% jump. Now that doesn't get us all the way to RBG's famous line in a congressional hearing that she thought 9 Supreme Court justices as women was about the right number, but at least we're getting us moved along that. Okay, I just had to throw that one in, please.
Oh, that's fabulous. And I love that quote from RBG. She's fabulous. We miss her a lot. Okay, so moving right along, lots of great initiatives here. There's a new list of arbitrators of African descent that was created by Catherine Simpson and Nancy Thevenin, who are international arbitrators. And it's a collection of individuals, seasoned arbitration practitioners of African descent from around the world. And the list is circulating in PDF format around on the internet. So if you look for it, I'm sure you will be able to find it. If what this list does is answer the question, when you say to a person, why haven't you proposed any diverse neutrals? They say, well, I don't know any, or neutrals of African descent. I don't know any. Well, here's a list. So no longer can someone say they don't know of any seasoned arbitration professionals. These are arbitrators, but I'm sure they'd be open to mediating as well. You now have a list of people from whom you could start your research. Women in Dispute Resolution is another initiative that was formed as a task force in the dispute resolution section of the American Bar Association. roughly 10 years ago, and it was supposed to assess the status of women in the profession, identify barriers to their selection as neutrals, and develop initiatives to increase the number of women neutrals. And many individuals who founded the Women in Dispute Resolution Task Force also are members of another organization called Arbitral Women. And the purpose of Arbitral Women is to advance women arbitrators and women practitioners, particularly in international arbitration, but across ADR. And both of these organizations have presences on the internet, so you can look them up and find out more. And so that's on the diversity side. And I'm happy to move to the environmental side if you'd like. So there's a couple of initiatives out there, and these are really interactive. These are pledges, these are campaigns, these are concrete actions that you can take in your organization. And even as an individual neutral, you can be part of these that I'm about to speak about. So one is called the Campaign for Greener Arbitration, and Deborah and I are both very involved on their steering committee for North America. So they have a green pledge, which is essentially a pledge to reduce the carbon footprint of international arbitration in particular, but it could be across arbitration, mediation, et cetera. It was founded in 2019 by Lucy Greenwood and others. And there are three main themes. First, clean energy. So making sure that we reduce the use of fossil fuels fossil fuels. Reducing long haul travel. So in international arbitration, of course, you could be crisscrossing the globe. Some of that is necessary. So there is some travel that has to be done. And in that situation, finding ways to purchase carbon offsets, or and what that is, I should explain for anyone who may not know. A carbon offset is helping to fund other activities in the world, and that could be types of planting of trees or other types of things that help reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere to balance out the carbon that is emitted due to the travel or whatever it is you have to do. So that's what a carbon offset is. So when you hear someone talk about that, it means that they've made a contribution to a system that's going to take out of the atmosphere the amount of carbon that they're putting in. And then generally reducing waste. So I mentioned paper earlier, multiple copies, binders, signatures, all these things are paper typically. And so as much as possible, digitizing things helps quite a bit as well. The campaign also has protocols for each constituency. So institutions, corporate, council, arbitrators themselves. There's even a model procedural order. So if you're in an arbitration, or even if there are any judges that happen to be listening to this, and you'd like to have a cleaner courtroom or a cleaner proceeding, you can take a look at the model procedural order on the campaign's website that has elements that a neutral might want to include in their first order to the parties regarding procedure to help reduce the environmental footprint. And then we also have a World Mediators Alliance Green Pledge as well. So it's the World Mediators Alliance on Climate Change, and there's the Mediators Green Pledge that goes along with that. And it's sort of the mediation analog to the Campaign for Greener Arbitration on the arbitration side. And mediation already has had a huge booming presence on online platforms. And that may even become more of a default even after the pandemic passes. So I think mediation has a lot of advantages because there don't have to be as many documents necessarily in mediation, and travel isn't as necessary. I think it's key. So you can look online and see the text of the Mediators Green Pledge. If you look up WOMAC, WOMACC, that's their acronym for the World Mediation Alliance, World Mediators Alliance on Climate Change. And so the last thing I'll say is, well, what about litigation? I mentioned courts briefly. In the brief research that Deborah was able to find out, and some anecdotes that I've gotten from judges, there's not a lot. Part of it is because of just litigation is even, more, has a lot more machinery. There's the physical court. People want their day in court. So there's a lot of things that litigation can't do, but paper, you can always reduce paper. Some courts are continuing to allow virtual hearings, even though the pandemic is starting to subside, and virtual testimony from witnesses. So, there's some things that can be done, but definitely our ADR is more progressive in this front and is leading the way. But I do think litigation will hopefully soon follow.
It is very interesting, isn't it, Victoria, the extent to which it's really the ADR providers who are able to make the changes. And part of that is sort of the flexibility, I think, of private versus government, whether it's profit or nonprofit, to be able to step out of the structures. But I did reach out to the ABA's business law section Committee on Business Courts, and they're not aware of any national initiatives to try to enhance green, although many new courthouses that are being built are LEED certified and more energy efficient. And that's one of the great steps that can be taken. Brad, Zabby, again, you guys are our experts of working frontline with organizations. What other suggestions do you have for either picking up on some of the things that Victoria mentioned, or other ideas that you all have for practical solutions?
Well, Deborah, I'd like to build on some of the things that Victoria mentioned. Obviously excuse me, the cleanest kilowatt is the one that is not used, is the saying that we have in energy efficiency. So, number one, look at your space where you're working. Have you upgraded your lighting fixtures to LEDs? Is your HVAC system as efficient as possible? Think about things that you can do there. A second step is in a number of jurisdictions, you can work with your local power company to actually purchase renewable energy. So you can have your office or conferencing facilities that you're using use 100% clean energy. Then Victoria talked about offsets, and there are a number of offset providers. If you have a small operation, you may want to go to the University of California at Berkeley has a free carbon calculator that you can use online to figure out what your carbon impact is. It will account for your office space, your travel, other elements like that. You then can come up with the amount of tons of CO2 equivalent that may be emitted. There are a number of services that provide commission-free sales of the types of offsets that Victoria was talking about. And there's a great deal of variety in these offsets. It may be that you can do something locally in your community with tree planting or energy efficiency, or potentially that you could do something internationally. The highest quality offset is the type of offset that actually removes carbon from the atmosphere, because you know that that's going to directly offset carbon that you're putting into the atmosphere. So some of this is called direct air capture. And just to give you an order of magnitude, those offsets are trading roughly around $200 a metric ton, where planting trees and at scale may be something that's more like $15 a ton, and both are high quality offsets. If you've got a larger operation, or those of you that are in-house counsel with corporations, you may need to do more complex accounting. A company, Persephone, is the current leader in that space. They're a fairly new company, but they're working with the likes of Amazon to calculate very large scale carbon footprints. There's a company here in North Carolina that works on calculating carbon footprints and doing offsets, and then certifying companies or places of business as green places to work. The company's called Green Places. And we at Credo have worked with them a number of times. Again, at the smaller end of the scale, there's a company called TerraPass, where you can offset your individual carbon footprint or your company carbon footprint. And we also work with a carbon broker. Again, if you have decent sized needs, a company called STX is one that I highly recommend on carbon offset. So looking at it from the direct energy part of environmental needs, those are my recommendations.
Great. Zabby, as we're coming close to the end of our time, what additional thoughts and practical solutions do you have for the Thoughtful Lawyers Toolkit?
I think companies can really amplify their impact by involving their employees and their clients in this initiative. And what we always recommend is that the program, the CSR sustainability program, diversity program, not be built top down. These initiatives should not be, a vanity project for a CEO or a checkbox exercise. It should be something that is really takes into account the needs and input of a cross section of the employee base. And those types of programs tend to have higher participation levels, higher engagement levels. They tend to be more successful overall. There are a number of actions that employees and clients can be encouraged to take. Donations and volunteering are the two most common ones, but lifestyle pledges, advocacy, petitions can also be powerful tools. Lifestyle pledges can be very well connected with ESG objectives. That could be to encourage employees to bike to work, to engage in clothes swaps instead of giving into fast fashion. So there are a number of types of activities, a lot of organizations that are very good at that. That's what we do. We try to curate a bunch of these actions and make them available for companies. So there isn't a lack of action. There isn't a lack of meaningful impact. There are challenges around engaging employees, especially in a virtual world. But everyone in this space that I've spoken with is optimistic that with even a hybrid working model, there will be more opportunities for people to spend time together. The one action that we found that is the most effective at engaging the employee base and helping really build culture and align values is group volunteering events. It's a bit like conferences. That's where sort of magic happens. That's where relationships are built. That's where people realize that the company is serious about this initiative. It's not just, I clicked on this button and that's the end of it. So we really encourage those types of interactions.
Thank you, Zabby. And I know we're all looking forward to the day when we can routinely and without checking the strain of the day, be involved in those group volunteering activities. I think the call to action and the suggestions that you all have given have demonstrated really give an opportunity for the best of lawyering. Lawyers get painted too often unfairly as naysayers or as at best a cost center. And you've given us a lot of very concrete solutions for how lawyers can contribute their creativity and determination to problem solving across the space of ESG, and particularly at the intersection of that with ADR. Thank you so much, Brad, Zabby, Victoria, for being with us today. Thank you to those of us who've given us your time, and to Alterity. And with that, I bid you all a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.